The first time Krell saw the human female holding the plasma blade, he nearly laughed out loud. Not because the situation was funny. No! Nothing about being trapped in a failing starship with a crew of panicking Vorthak raiders was remotely amusing. But the way she gripped the weapon, all wrong, fingers positioned like she was holding a dinner fork instead of a tool designed to cut through reinforced hull plating, that was almost comical. "You don't even know how to hold it," he said, his translator unit converting his clicking mandibles into something approximating human speech. She looked up at him. Her name was Mira, according to the prisoner manifest he had glimpsed before the ship's systems started failing. Brown hair pulled back in a messy tail. Dark eyes that seemed too calm for someone wearing restraint cuffs in a cargo bay that smelled like burnt circuitry and fear. She was small, even for a human, which made the oversized plasma blade in her hands look even more ridiculous. "Maybe," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Or maybe I'm just letting you think that." Krell's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. Was she serious? Humans and their bizarre sense of humor always caught him off guard. 3 cycles he had spent studying their species after the Galactic Council had approved their admission as a protectorate race, and he still could not tell when they were joking. The ship lurched violently. Somewhere in the distance, metal screamed against metal. The lights flickered, died, then returned as emergency power kicked in, bathing everything in that awful red glow that made his exoskeleton itch. "We need to move," Krell said, trying to keep his voice steady. "The reactor containment is failing. We have maybe 20 minutes before this entire vessel becomes a very bright, very brief star." Mira stood up slowly, the plasma blade humming in her grip. She was still holding it wrong. Definitely wrong. The activation stud faced away from her thumb, which meant she would have to rotate her entire wrist to increase the cutting intensity. Amateur mistake. Fatal, usually. 20 minutes, she repeated, as if tasting the words. "That's optimistic." "Excuse me? I've been counting the interval between power fluctuations," she said, moving toward the cargo bay door with surprising confidence for someone in magnetic restraint cuffs. "They're accelerating. I'd say 15 minutes. Tops." Krell stared at her. His translator unit made a small whirring sound, as if it too was confused by what it had just processed. "You can calculate reactor failure rates from power fluctuations?" he asked. "Can't everyone?" No, they absolutely could not. Krell had spent 6 standard years in engineering school on Proxima Station, and he would need a diagnostic terminal and at least 3 cups of stimulant brew to attempt that kind of calculation. Another lurch. This time, Krell heard something that sounded distinctly like an explosion from somewhere deeper, in the ship. The Vorthak raiders had not been gentle when they had seized this vessel from the mining colony at Kepler Station. They had killed the captain, executed half the crew, and taken the rest prisoner. Krell, unfortunately, had been valuable enough to keep alive. His expertise in xenobiology made him useful for identifying which species could be ransomed and which could be sold to the flesh markets on the outer rim. He hated every second of it. The human, Mira, had been alone in a maintenance shaft when the raiders had found her. No uniform, no identification, beyond her name on a work permit. The Vorthak commander, a brutal creature named Thrace, with scales like black armor and teeth that could bite through titanium, had thrown her in the cargo bay with the other prisoners and forgotten about her. Big mistake. When the reactor had started failing, chaos had erupted. The Vorthak had panicked, started fighting among themselves, and in the confusion, someone had accidentally released the magnetic locks on the cargo bay. The prisoners had scattered. Most had run toward the escape pods, which Krell knew were either already gone or non-functional. Mira had stayed behind. She had picked up a plasma blade from a dead raider, looked at Krell with those unnervingly calm eyes, and said, "You? Coming or not?" Now they were moving through corridors that twisted like intestines through the ship's dying body. Emergency lighting cast everything in shades of crimson and shadow. Bodies lay scattered here and there, mostly Vorthak. A few other species Krell did not have time to identify. The air tasted like copper and ozone. "The bridge," Krell said, his breathing apparatus working overtime. "If we can reach the bridge, there's a command override. We can manually eject in the captain's escape vessel. And you know where the bridge is? Third deck, forward section. I studied the ship's layout when they first brought me aboard." "Smart," Mira said. She was walking. Slightly ahead of him now, the plasma blade held low, ready. Still holding it wrong, but she moved with the kind of deliberate precision that made Krell's survival instincts whisper warnings in the back of his mind. They reached a junction where 3 corridors met. Krell was about to suggest taking the left passage when Mira held up one hand. The restraint cuffs on her wrists hummed softly, the magnetic field distorting slightly. "Wait," she whispered. Krell froze. His sensory antennae extended, sampling the air. At first, he detected nothing unusual. Then he heard it. Breathing. Heavy. Labored. Coming from the right corridor. 3 Vorthak raiders emerged from the shadows. They looked rough, their armor scorched and dented, their weapons held with the kind of desperate aggression that came from knowing you were probably going to die soon and wanting to take someone with you. The largest one, a female with a scar running across her snout, pointed a plasma rifle at them. She growled in broken standard. "Engineer, you fix reactor. Now." Krell opened his mouth to explain that the reactor was beyond fixing, that the containment failure was terminal, that they were all living on borrowed time. Before he could say anything, Mira moved. She did not run at them, did not charge like some action hero from human entertainment media. She simply stepped forward, raising the plasma blade in what looked like the most awkward defensive posture Krell had ever seen. The Vorthak laughed. Even Krell felt a twinge of second-hand embarrassment. "Human think she fighter," the scarred Vorthak said, her translator mangling the grammar. "Human think she brave." Mira smiled. It was not a nice smile. "No," she said quietly. "I think you should have paid more attention." The plasma blade flickered. For a split second, Krell thought it was malfunctioning. Then he realized what was happening. She had been holding it wrong, on purpose. The blade's energy matrix was designed to be stable, when held in standard configuration. But if you held it at just the right wrong angle, if you positioned your fingers in a way that put pressure on the secondary stabilization coil, you could create a feedback loop. The energy field would become unstable, fluctuating wildly. And if you were very good, very precise, very insane, you could release that energy all at once, in a directed burst. The plasma blade exploded in Mira's hands. Not a destructive explosion, a focused one. A wave of superheated energy that shot forward like a spear, crossing the distance between her and the Vorthak in less than a heartbeat. The scarred raider's plasma rifle melted. Just melted, the metal turning to slag in her clawed hands. She screamed, dropping the weapon, stumbling backward. The 2 raiders behind her opened fire, but Mira was already moving, diving to the side, rolling with practiced ease despite the restraint cuffs. Krell stood there, frozen, watching as the human female who supposedly did not know how to hold a weapon proceeded to systematically dismantle 3 trained Vorthak raiders using nothing but momentum, timing, and what appeared to be an intimate knowledge of their psychology. She did not fight them directly. She made them fight each other. A shoulder check that sent one stumbling into another. A feint that made the scarred one fire at her own comrade. By the time Krell's brain caught up with what his eyes were seeing, all 3 Vorthak were on the ground, unconscious or worse. And Mira was standing there breathing hard, her restraint cuffs sparking from the plasma feedback. "We should go," she said, as if nothing unusual had just happened. "Clock's ticking." Krell followed her. What else could he do? They climbed through access shafts and emergency ladders, making their way upward through the ship's skeleton. Twice they encountered more Vorthak, and twice Mira handled them with the same disturbing efficiency. She picked up weapons from fallen raiders, used them briefly, then discarded them. She seemed to prefer improvisation over standard tactics. "Who are you?" Krell finally asked as they paused in a maintenance bay to catch their breath. 10 minutes left, maybe less. The ship was shaking constantly now, a low vibration that made his teeth ache. "I fix things." Maintenance engineers do not fight like that. Some of us do. That is not an answer. She smiled again. That same, not quite right smile. Before I was a maintenance engineer, I was other things, did other work, for people who needed problems solved. What kind of problems? The kind that shoot back. Krell's translator unit processed that, flagged it as a colloquialism, then provided context from human military history. Oh no. You were a soldier, he said. Contractor, Mira corrected. There's a difference. Soldiers follow orders. Contractors negotiate payment. But yes, same basic skill set. Point at target. Make target. Stop being a problem. Why did you stop? Because I got tired of solving other people's problems, she said quietly. Wanted to fix things instead of breaking them. Turns out, I'm not very good at the peaceful life. Funny how that works, the ship screamed. Mira said, already running. They burst onto the bridge 2 minutes later. It was chaos. The command crew was dead or gone. Control panels sparked and smoked. The main view screen showed nothing but static, and the occasional glimpse of stars wheeling past as the ship tumbled through space. There, Krell pointed with one of his secondary arms. The captain's escape vessel. That hatch. They ran for it. Krell's fingers flew across the access panel, entering override codes he had memorized from watching the Vorthak commander. The hatch hissed, started to open. That was when Thrace appeared. The Vorthak commander was massive, easily twice Mira's size, his black scales gleaming in the emergency lighting. He held a plasma axe in one clawed hand and fury in his eyes. The reactor failed because your crew damaged it during the raid. Thrace was not interested in explanations. He raised the plasma axe. Mira stepped between them. She had no weapon. The last plasma blade had burned out 3 decks ago. Her restraint cuffs were barely functional, crackling with residual energy. She was exhausted, bleeding from a cut above one eye, and facing a warrior who could literally tear her apart with his bare hands. "Move aside, human," Thrace growled. "Or die with him." Mira looked up at the towering Vorthak. She was still smiling. "You know what your problem is?" she asked conversationally. Thrace blinked, confused by the question. "You assume smaller means weaker," Mira continued. "It's a common mistake. Lots of species make it, especially the ones who rely on physical strength." She raised her hands, showing him the malfunctioning restraint cuffs. "See these? Magnetic field generators. Very powerful. Designed to restrain prisoners by creating a localized gravitational distortion. Real clever tech." Thrace started to swing the plasma axe. Mira twisted her wrists in a specific way, bringing the cuffs together. The magnetic fields intersected, collapsed, then inverted. The resulting pulse was invisible but devastating. It hit Thrace like a physical blow, disrupting the electrical signals in his nervous system, overloading his sensory organs. He staggered, dropped the axe, clutched at his head. Mira kicked him, hard, right in the knee joint where the armor plates met. Thrace fell. "Get in the pod," Mira said to Krell. "Now." Krell scrambled through the hatch. Mira followed, slapping the emergency seal button as she dove inside. The hatch slammed, shut just as Thrace recovered enough to lunge at them. His claws scraped across the reinforced viewport, leaving scratches but no structural damage. Mira dropped into the pilot's seat, her fingers dancing across controls that should have been unfamiliar but clearly were not. The escape vessel detached with a sharp clang, thrusters firing, pushing them away from the dying starship. Through the rear viewport, Krell watched as the raider vessel began to come apart. The reactor went critical 30 seconds later, exactly as Mira had predicted. The explosion was brief, bright, and beautiful in a terrible way. Then it was gone, and they were alone in the black, floating in a tiny escape pod in the middle of nowhere. Silence. "Well," Mira said, leaning back in the pilot's seat with a sigh. "That was exciting." Krell stared at her. His translator unit made worried beeping sounds. "Exciting," he repeated flatly. "You just destroyed a ship full of Vorthak raiders using improvised tactics and broken equipment? And you call it exciting? Would you prefer terrifying?" "Because it was that too." "Who are you, really?" Mira was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached up and did something to her restraint cuffs. They clicked open, falling away from her wrists, revealing skin marked with old scars and faded tattoos that Krell's database identified as human military service marks. "Just someone who used to be good at violence," she said. "Trying not to be, not always successfully." Krell processed that. Then he laughed. He could not help it. The absurdity of everything, the terror, the relief of being alive, it all bubbled up in a sound his species made when overwhelmed. Mira looked at him, surprised, then smiled. A real smile this time, not the dangerous one. "What?" she asked. "Humans," Krell said, shaking his head. "You absolute terrifying, wonderful, impossible creatures. The galaxy has no idea what it's gotten itself into." "Is that a compliment?" "I genuinely cannot tell. Ask me again when my heart stops racing." Mira laughed. The sound was warm and unexpected in the cold metal of the escape pod. Outside, the stars watched, ancient and patient, as the tiny vessel drifted through the void, carrying two survivors who had learned something important about each other and about the strange, dangerous, sometimes beautiful nature of survival itself. The escape pod's navigation system was, to put it mildly, garbage. Krell had spent the last hour trying to coax some useful information from the cracked display screen, while Mira worked on bypassing the emergency beacon that would broadcast their location to anyone listening, which, given their recent experience with who might be listening, seemed like a spectacularly bad idea. "Anything?" Mira asked, not looking up from the tangle of wires she had pulled from an access panel. "Define anything," Krell muttered. "If you mean vague coordinates that might indicate we are somewhere between 3 star systems and absolute nowhere, then yes. If you mean actionable data that could save our lives, then no," Mira snorted. "So, we're lost." Profoundly. The pod was cramped. Designed for emergency evacuation, not comfort. Every surface was cold, metal, and harsh angles. Life support systems hummed and wheezed like an elderly creature with respiratory problems. The air smelled recycled, which it was, and tasted faintly of copper, which was concerning. Krell's primary eyes focused on a readout that kept flickering between 2 different measurements. Water reserves are adequate for maybe 6 days. Food supplies are non-existent unless you count the emergency ration bars, which I personally do not, because they taste like compressed regret. "I've had worse," Mira said absently. "I believe you." She finished something, with the wires, and the beacon's status light changed from green to amber. Not off, but muted, broadcasting on frequencies that only friendly vessels would monitor, assuming any friendly vessels existed in this sector. Big assumption. Mira settled into the co-pilot seat, stretching her legs as much as the confined space allowed. The scars on her wrists were more visible now, patterns that told stories Krell suspected he did not want to hear. "So," she said after a moment, "xenobiology expert. That's an interesting career path. What made you choose it?" Krell's antennae twitched. Small talk. Humans loved small talk. His species found it inefficient, but he had learned to appreciate the ritual of it. Distraction from imminent death had its value. Curiosity, he said, and stubbornness. My clutchmates all went into mathematics or stellar cartography. Safe, respectable fields. I wanted to understand why different species evolved the way they did. What factors shaped consciousness across the galaxy? Find any answers? More questions mostly. The universe is aggressively complicated. Mira smiled at that. Yeah, it really is. A comfortable silence settled between them. The pod drifted through space, pushed by momentum, and nothing else. Through the viewport, stars stretched in all directions, indifferent to the tiny metal seed floating through their domain. Then, the proximity alarm started screaming. Both of them were on their feet instantly, Krell's multiple hands flying across the console while Mira pulled up the external camera feeds. "Ship?" she said tersely. "Big one. No identification transponder." Krell's blood went cold. Or rather, the fluid that served as blood in his species dropped several degrees. Vorthak reinforcements? Checking weapon signatures. Mira's fingers moved with practiced speed across the tactical display. Hull design does not match any radar patterns in the database. The unknown vessel was approaching fast. Too fast. Interceptor class, maybe, or a modified scout ship with enhanced engines. Its trajectory was precise, calculated. Not the wild, aggressive approach of pirates. Something else. "They're hailing us," Krell said, staring at the communication panel like it had personally insulted him. Audio only. Mira and Krell exchanged glances. She nodded. Krell opened the channel. "This is Escape Pod 7 Alpha from the mining vessel Prosperity. We are unarmed and low on supplies. Please identify yourself." Static crackled. Then a voice, filtered through translation software but unmistakably human. "Pod 7 Alpha. This is the independent vessel, Razor's Edge. We picked up your distress beacon fragments and your very interesting electromagnetic signature. You mind telling us why you're drifting in Vorthak territory with a dead raider cruiser turning into an expanding debris field behind you?" Mira leaned forward. "Define independent vessel." A pause. Then, a laugh. "Fair question. Let's just say we're not affiliated with any government, corporation, or military force. We work for ourselves. Salvage, mostly. Transport, sometimes. Other services, as needed. Mercenaries," Mira translated quietly. "Entrepreneurs with flexible morals?" the voice corrected, apparently hearing her. "Big difference. One pays better." Krell's translator unit highlighted the humor in that statement, but he was too stressed to appreciate it. "Can you offer assistance?" "Depends. What can you offer in return?" Of course. Nothing was free in the outer sectors. Krell started to explain that he had no currency, no resources, nothing of value, when Mira spoke up. "Information," she said, "about the Vorthak raider operations in this sector. Locations, command structures, supply routes, plus technical expertise. My friend here is a xenobiology specialist. I'm decent with ship systems and creative problem-solving." Another pause. Longer this time. Krell could almost hear calculations being performed on the other end. "Information is always valuable," the voice said finally. "And we do have a broken atmospheric processor that's been making everyone miserable for 3 weeks. Tell you what. We'll bring you aboard, hear what you know, and if it's useful, we'll drop you at the nearest neutral station. Fair deal?" Mira looked at Krell. He cycled through his limited options in about 2 seconds and came up with exactly one conclusion. "Fair deal," he said. The docking process took 20 minutes. The Razor's Edge was indeed a modified scout vessel, but someone had grafted what looked like cargo hauler components onto its frame, creating a ship that was part speed demon and part flying warehouse. Aesthetically, it was hideous. Functionally, it probably worked surprisingly well. The airlock cycled open, and they were greeted by a human male with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and eyes that had seen too much. He wore practical clothing, layers of thermal fabric and reinforced panels, with enough pockets to carry a small armory. "Captain Yen," he introduced himself, extending a hand to Mira, then pausing as he tried to figure out how to greet Krell. "Welcome aboard! Sorry about the mess. We're between jobs, and the crew gets lazy." The interior of the Razor's Edge was indeed messy, but in an organized chaos kind of way. Equipment secured to walls, storage crates stacked with military precision, everything within easy reach. A crew of maybe 8 people, mixed species, 2 humans, a Kelvorian with crystalline skin that refracted light, something that looked like an ambulatory fungal colony, and others Krell could not immediately identify. They were led to a conference room that doubled as a galley. Captain Yen gestured for them to sit. "So," he said without preamble, "you blew up a Vorthak raider cruiser. That's impressive. Stupid, but impressive. Care to explain how 2 prisoners managed that?" Mira told the story efficiently, leaving out unnecessary details, but including enough to make it clear they had not simply gotten lucky. Krell added technical information about the reactor failure, demonstrating his expertise without bragging. Captain Yen listened without interrupting. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "The Vorthak have been expanding operations in this sector for 6 months, he said, hitting mining colonies, transport convoys, even a few military supply ships. Council forces are stretched too thin to respond effectively. People are scared, and you want to do something about it?" Yen corrected. "Altruism is expensive, but if taking down a few raider operations happens to make my routes safer, well, that's just good business sense." "You want targets," Krell said, understanding dawning. "We give you information. You hit the raiders. Everyone profits except the pirates. Efficient, right?" Then she said, "There was a staging post, coordinates I memorized from a navigation console before everything went sideways. Thrace, the commander, he mentioned it once, said it was where they processed captured ships before selling them." Captain Yen sat up straighter. "How big?" "Asteroid base? Probably. Small crew, maybe 20 raiders. Valuable cargo changing hands regularly. You're sure about this?" "Sure enough to bet my ride to a neutral station on it." Yen smiled. It was not a nice smile, but it was honest. "I like you. You think like a merc. Ever consider going back to that line of work?" "Every day," Mira said. "And every day I decide not to, trying to be better than I was. How's that working out? Ask me after we survive the next crisis." They shook on it. Krell provided additional intelligence about Vorthak tactics and biology, useful information for anyone planning a raid. In return, Captain Yen promised transport to Meridian Station, a neutral hub world where they could book passage to anywhere in Council space. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. The Razor's Edge crew prepared for the operation, while Mira helped repair their atmospheric processor, and Krell analyzed biological samples from various crew members who wanted to know if they had picked up parasites during recent jobs. He had. 3 of them, actually. Krell prescribed treatments and gave stern lectures about proper decontamination procedures. On the 3rd day, they reached the coordinates Mira had provided. The asteroid was exactly where she said it would be. A hollowed-out rock with concealed docking bays and sensor arrays that would have been invisible to anyone not specifically looking for them. "Good intelligence," Captain Yen said approvingly. "Very good. You want in on this?" Mira hesitated. Krell saw the conflict in her expression, the pull between who she had been and who she was trying to become. "No," she said finally. "That's not my fight anymore, but good hunting." Yen nodded, respecting the decision. He left to coordinate with his crew, leaving Mira and Krell alone in the observation deck. They watched through reinforced viewports as the Razor's Edge launched its assault. It was quick, professional, brutal. The raiders never had a chance. Within an hour, The base was secured, cargo liberated, and several very surprised prisoners were being loaded into holding cells. "Does it bother you?" Krell asked quietly. "Watching others do what you used to do?" Mira was silent for a long time. "Yes," she said eventually, "but not the way you might think. It bothers me that I'm good at it. That part of me wants to be down there, in the action. That's the part I'm fighting against." "Why?" "Because violence is easy. Breaking things is easy. Building something, fixing something, creating, instead of destroying, that's hard. And I think the galaxy needs more people trying to do hard things." Krell thought about that, about his own choices, his own path, about how he had been forced into helping raiders because staying alive seemed more important than staying ethical. "I think you are right," he said. "But I also think the galaxy needs people who can do both, who can fight when necessary, but choose not to when possible. Balance, maybe." Mira looked at him, surprised. Then she smiled. "When did you get philosophical? I have been trapped in a failing starship, nearly killed multiple times, and rescued by mercenaries. Trauma makes philosophers of us all." She laughed at that, the sound genuine and warm. The Razor's Edge delivered them to Meridian Station 4 days later. Captain Yen refused payment, said the intelligence had been worth far more than transport costs. He did give Mira a communication code, just in case she ever changed her mind about the quiet life. She took it, but did not promise anything. Meridian Station was overwhelming after days in confined spaces. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species, all flowing through corridors and market squares like water through complex pipes. Noise, light, smells, chaos organized into something resembling civilization. Krell arranged passage back to his home world. Academic positions were waiting, research grants to apply for, the normal life he had been torn away from. Mira bought a ticket to a frontier colony world. "Maintenance work?" she said. "Honest labor. Far from the complications of the core systems." They stood at the departure gate, an awkward moment stretching between them. "Thank you," Krell said finally, "for keeping me alive, for being terrifying and competent in equal measure." "Thank you for not being useless," Mira replied, "and for helping me remember that smart matters as much as strong. Will you be all right? Out on the frontier?" She considered the question seriously. "Probably not, but I'll keep trying. That's all anyone can do, right? Keep trying to be better than yesterday." Krell extended his primary hand. Mira shook it, human custom meeting alien biology in a gesture of mutual respect. They parted ways at the gate. Krell watched her disappear into the private crowd, just another human among thousands, unremarkable to anyone who did not know her story. But he knew. He had seen what she could do when pushed, had watched her turn weakness into strength, ignorance into strategy, fear into action. The galaxy, he thought as he boarded his transport, had no idea how lucky it was that humans like Mira Cade were trying to be peaceful. Because if they ever stopped trying, if they ever let that violence out without restraint, well, the universe was complicated enough without adding that variable. Krell settled into his seat, exhausted but alive, and allowed himself a small smile. Somewhere out there, on some frontier world, a maintenance engineer was probably fixing something that most people would consider unfixable. And if trouble found her again, which it inevitably would, she would handle it the way humans always did, with improvisation, stubbornness, and that terrifying, wonderful competence that made them simultaneously the best allies and worst enemies in the known galaxy. The transport jumped to faster-than-light travel, and Krell closed his eyes, already looking forward to the boring, predictable safety of academic life. He had earned it. They both had.